tall stained glass globe of the earth lit up by hundreds and hundreds of LED lights. You do not walk around it, you walk through the middle of it, through the inside. It's a beautiful art installation. Photos do not do it justice. Admission, last I checked, was $6 a person. So the $6 you save by moving to New York City, out of Boston on average, you can then spend those $6 at the Maparium, and there you are. The landscaping outside is quite lovely. The architecture is phenomenal, but the Maparium is a really unique thing to go and check out here in the city. Again, at a very low price point. So this will be stop 10 just around the corner as soon as the lights cycle back through Sheraton, Hilton, Fenway, Newbury Street, the Maparium. If you are hopping out of the trolley here, as with any and all of our stops, keep yourselves in your seats until we're parked. The doors are open. Mind your steps, take things with you on the way out. 364 days a year with the exception of Christmas for 50 years, 50 years to fill in the Back Bay. All to build what you see around us now, which is a residential neighborhood for some of Boston's wealthiest citizens, the Boston Brahmins, as they were then known. Highly prized real estate way back when. These beautiful brick and Victorian brownstone buildings, they were all brand new. Highly prized real estate now, not because everything here is new, but because everything here is quite old, and that does indeed make it historic. It also certainly helps that everything on the right side of this here trolley is waterfront property parallel to the Charles River. So we've got all of our brownstones, then we've got the Esplanade, the hiking trails, the biking trails, the Boston Pops perform over there each and every 4th of July. The Charles River, and then Cambridge, Boston's sister city on the far side of the water. To throw some numbers at you real quick. Apartment number 5, 300 Beacon Street, which is just a little bit behind us now. That apartment, that building was sold a couple of years ago for $893,000. And we've got 150 Beacon Street, 150 Beacon Street, the plot of land formerly owned by Mrs. Isabella Stewart Gardner. That went for its asking price within the last year, just shy of $7.5 million. And then 56 Beacon Street, so 56 on the border of the Back Bay and Beacon Hill, but it's on the same street, it's in the same general area. A few rows of buildings down from the State House, looking out across the street at Boston Common. 56 Beacon Street, a single-family townhome, 5 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a 4-car garage. Some of those are half baths, to be fair, but 4-car garage that I assume is somewhere in the back. That finally went for its asking price 2 Januaries ago. A cool $31 million. None of these numbers have anything to do with the homeowners association fees attached to each property. Those can range from the several thousands of dollars per month. Business Insider once listed the zip code for the Back Bay and a couple of the surrounding areas as not one of the most, but simply the most expensive parcel of real estate buying to own in the United States. And then recently, through what I believe to have been the combined efforts of Boston's Back Bay and Boston's Seaport, Boston at long last beat out New York City by 6 polls as the most expensive city Boston is a historic city. Everywhere in Boston has a very deep-rooted history and a very unique character. Regardless of where you go, a lot of the things that people come into Boston to see and to do can be found in this part of the city.
I have a question.
Yeah, I have an answer.
So what approximately is the square footage of some of those like apartments around that you're talking about?
Oh goodness.
I just wondered, are they small like New York or are they large?
No, so for the Beacon Street apartments, 336 Beacon, I don't remember the square footage exactly, but it was 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and fairly comfortable square footage. I remember I looked through real estate listings to find numbers that are very large and absurd to work into the tour. And around left and right side of us, these beautiful brick and Victorian brownstone townhouses and apartments comprising the Back Bay neighborhood itself. And we're driving on down Beacon Street, which is named as such because the Puritans, well, they were rather bad at naming things. Beacon Street goes up Beacon Hill. Beacon Hill is a hill, and there used to be a beacon on top. So that's what we called it. But the part of Beacon Street that we're driving down did not exist at such a time when the Puritans established the town of Boston in 1630. Because the Puritans were also very bad at naming things. Or very bad at city planning. The town of Boston was established on the Shawmut Peninsula, which was 1.2 square miles of land connected to the mainland by one road, no wider than the road in front of us here, and it would flood when the tide was high. Present-day Boston is not 1.2 square miles, of course. It's 48 square miles of land, 48 square nautical miles, because when we ran out of room, something which happened fairly quickly, we started making new land upon which we could then make new buildings. And 90% of Boston here, 90, is in fact built on top of landfill. The Back Bay was the first landfill project of its type so far from the last.
Rogue, what they call a rake. He was a wealthy playboy who had inherited a fortune from a wealthy uncle who made it a condition of inheritance that Peter Faneuil, who financed this hall, never marry. So Peter Faneuil became a playboy, the arch enemy of every married man in Boston that couldn't wait to get rid of him. On top of the gold dome, a weatherman shaped like a grasshopper in front, Sam Adams. John Adams, the second cousin, Quincy Martin is behind him. Faneuil Hall dates from 1742. Peter Faneuil was deeply unpopular, and he was also fond of dueling, which unfortunately for him was illegal, except under 2 specific conditions, which I'll get to in a minute. They caught him illegally dueling on the common and slung him out. To this day, however, it is perfectly legal for any one of you to fight a duel to the death on Boston Common. You can do it if it's on a Sunday and the governor is present. This, to me, is an excellent way to settle elections. Peter Faneuil did not pick a Sunday and the governor hated him, so out he went. The oldest building you can see from the trolley to your right. Old State House, 1713. It took 2 years to build. Boy, renovated countless times. It's 300 then. 12 years old. It once had a staircase leading to the balcony of the sundial, which is in the museum inside. The lion and unicorn represent England and Scotland. I'll explain the significance of that in a second. See the manhole cover to your right? That's pretty close to where the shooting we call the Boston Massacre actually took place. March the 5th, 1770, following a brawl between off-duty British soldiers and unemployed Boston men applying for the same jobs at the same time. That's what triggered a shooting that left 5 dead, 6 wounded, and led to a murder trial. I'll tell you about the trial in a second. This is stop 5. It was a crime to practice the Catholic religion. Those men would not officially get the last rites from the Catholic Church until 1897, when they were reburied with great ceremony and publicity in heavily Irish Catholic Boston in the late 19th century. They were reburied at Boston Common. Every once in a while, the Park Service will still dig up an artifact from the battle. It's such a peaceful place up there now, surrounded by beautiful houses, all of them built after the battle of June the 17th, 1775, because the entire area was burned to the ground following the battle. The last major battle fought in Massachusetts during the Revolutionary War. Boston then, demographically, could not have looked more different. Over to our left, there would have been 3 big hills, for example. But only one survives, Beacon Hill, at 63 feet, 65 feet shorter than it was originally. Century Hill and Cotton Hill would have been over there. They don't exist anymore. What happened to them? They were taken down by manual labor, Irish Catholic manual labor, used for landfill, part of which we're driving over. 70% of Boston is landfill. Colonial Boston was only 1.2 square miles in diameter, and by 1775 had more than 14,000 residents. That caused all sorts of problems. Waste disposal, clean drinking water, burials. They had run out of room to bury people. If you wanted to be buried in consecrated ground, there were no real cemeteries as such, only the old churchyards, which were tiny. So you had to pay somebody in Paul Revere's Boston to bury your coffin on top of someone else's coffin. This was called tombstone speculation, and it made the greedy and the unscrupulous very rich. If you didn't have the money for a tombstone speculator, you were buried in unconsecrated ground underneath Boston Common, which has 30 to 50,000 bodies under it, according to the Park Service. So, when the zombie apocalypse begins, please visit Boston. Battlefield medicine was primitive, and those musket balls left terrible wounds in the body, as opposed to a relatively clean wound inflicted by a bullet. So this would prove to be the last major battle fought in Massachusetts during the Revolutionary War. 5,500 men fought in this battle, 1,500 were killed in just 3 hours. The battle is still wrongly called the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was fought on Breed's Hill, June the 17th, 1775. It convinced the Continental Congress in Philadelphia to change its mind and authorize the creation of a Continental Army, with George Washington at its head. Washington and John Adams had already left Philadelphia in frustration because the Congress wasn't doing anything until the news from Breed's Hill arrived. Then things began to change. Washington and Adams would arrive in Boston on June 19th. The Continental Army came into existence on June 30th, and George Washington, in a spot marked by a bronze cannon in Harvard Square, would be sworn in as Commander-in-Chief July the 3rd, 1775. Bunker Hill Bridge to our right, and this is where the Boston Bruins and the Boston Celtics play the TD Bank North Garden. A postscript to the show was ready for the British. They fought the army to a standstill, then, as colonial reinforcements arrived, drove the British out of Concord all the way back to Boston in bloody hit-and-run fighting that would last the rest of the day. It was a terrible day for the army. They failed to arrest either Sam Adams or John Hancock when Revere arrived in Lexington after warning. Captain John Parker, he found Sam Adams and John Hancock, told them to get out of town. They did. They fled to the town of Woburn and were never arrested. The arsenal the army had been ordered to seize had already been moved because the Sons of Liberty's spies were that proficient. They knew what the army was going to do. And the British army, finest in the world, was simply outfought by colonial militiamen, sometimes right in front of their houses. The army was beaten. That was on April the 19th. George Washington and John Adams were still in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress. There was no Continental Army yet. The Congress refused to authorize one, much to their frustration. There would be stalemate for 2 months until the army, under heavy political pressure from London, tried to seize the hill we just saw, the hill the army wrongly thought was Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill is behind it, behind that obelisk. There was no fighting there. The 3-hour battle we call the Battle of Bunker Hill was actually fought on Breed's Hill, and it was incredibly bloody. Why did the army want it so badly? They wanted to use it as a staging area for an invasion of Cambridge dead ahead to the west. The army was destined never to make it out of Charlestown. And once again, Dr. Joseph Warren's spies learned of the British plans days in advance. So, the night before the expected attack, on the night of June the 16th, the attack was supposed to come on the 17th, Charlestown was evacuated. It was empty. 3,500 men, under the command of Colonel William Prescott, gathered on the hill. They were inexperienced. They had never seen combat before, but they all knew how to use a musket. They were using Brown Bess hunting muskets, which could knock a moose or a bear down at 300 yards. You can imagine what that musket would do to a human being 20 yards away. And the British were outnumbered and didn't know it. They were outnumbered 3,500 to 2,000. They thought there were only a few hundred colonists on the hill. There were 3,500 of them. The British, overconfident, were using conscript soldiers, Irish Catholic conscript soldiers, teenage Irish Catholic conscript soldiers, average age 19. They lined these young men up in a box formation, 100 men wide, 10 men deep, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon of June 17th, walked them slowly up the hill into concentrated musket fire. Colonel William Prescott told his inexperienced men to wait until the last minute before opening fire, told them to aim low and target flamboyantly dressed British officers first. They were perfect targets. Don't fire, he said, till you see the whites of the officers' eyes. They stuck out like sore thumbs, you couldn't mistake them. His objective was to decapitate the British Army's chain of command, which he did. And the Army took truly terrible casualties. They took fire at 60 feet. Those Brown Bess muskets could take out a moose at 300 yards. The injuries these young men suffered, many died of shock and exsanguination. They weren't killed instantly. Their arms and legs were blown off. And after the second charge, they mutinied. These Irish troops refused a direct order to attack the hill a third time, accusing their officers of incompetence, of throwing their lives away, a charge that was true. They wouldn't go up. British officers panicked, lynched one of their own men, hanged him on the spot, took out their swords and sliced the backs of their own men to ribbons to force them up the hill. By the time the army reached the top of Breed's Hill, after 3 hours of fighting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon of June the 17th, the army had lost 1,000 of its 2,000 men, half of them gone in 180 minutes. The colonists had lost 440 of their 3,500 men. Among them, Dr. Joseph Warren, shot in the head, killed instantly as he helped a wounded man on the hill. The Army never made it into Cambridge, and that was the strategic objective. This is stop number 4. As soon as they could between here and Lexington. Ordinarily, if you took in those days, if you wanted to take a horse from Boston to Lexington, without stopping anywhere, it's about a half-hour ride, maybe 40 minutes in those days. It took each man about 4 hours. They assumed the British Army massing on the far side of the Charles River would have been right behind them, but they were wrong. The Army had made a critical mistake. They had waited too long before trying to cross the Charles River. They waited until high tide, and the tides were too strong. They could only squeeze about 300 men from the Boston to the Cambridge side. The rest of them, 1,700 British soldiers, had to wait on the far side of the river on Boston Common until the tides subsided. This was a huge mistake. That blunder cost the British Army the Battle of Concord. So when Paul Revere arrived in Lexington thinking the Army was right behind him, he was dead wrong. No soldiers would show up, British soldiers would show up in Lexington until nearly noon the following day. Fortunate, because Captain John Parker, the Lexington militia chief, only had a very small force. He'd have been annihilated if he had had to face 2,000 men, as it was he only faced a few hundred. He fired a quick volley and retreated with mercifully very low casualties. Paul Revere and William Dawes, while in Lexington, had to switch out their horses. Their horses were exhausted. They wolfed down a quick meal and found their guide. Neither Revere nor Dawes knew the way to Concord. But their guide, Dr. Samuel Prescott, did. And it was his job to get them there. In the town of Lincoln, on the outskirts of Concord, they were stopped by an Army patrol.
He said, I am not done.
He's like, I'm done. Sorry.
And only Dr. Samuel Prescott and his dog got away. Collecting taxes, they would get a visit at 3 o'clock in the morning. Their door would be kicked in. They'd be dragged out of their houses, their night clothes ripped off, and they'd be covered head to toe in hot tar and feathers. This tactic was 100% effective. Tax collectors resigned en masse. Who wants to be tarred and feathered? No one could pay them enough to run that risk. And this effectively cut the flow of taxes going back to England from Boston down to virtually zero. The British Army was sent for, not just to restore order, always problematic in Boston, but to restore the flow of taxes. Again, it was primarily about money. The British Army arrived the 1st of October 1768, and from that point on, relations between England and her colonies deteriorated sharply and quickly. You have the Boston Massacre, March the 5th, 1770, the Boston Tea Party, December the 16th, 1773. Tell a long story about the Tea Party at the end of the tour. Events in India, thousands of miles away, and the terrible suffering inflicted on the people of India by the East India Company play a big role in this story. We'll talk about that near the end of the tour. Then came the crackdown following the Tea Party. The coercive or intolerable acts which blockaded the port, closed every business in Boston, threw everyone out of work. The capital was moved to Salem. And the directly elected assembly, directly elected since 1630, was shut down. At this point, even moderate colonists threw up their hands and said, okay, there's nothing for it now but armed rebellion. Throughout this entire period, throughout 1774 and early 1775, militias in the countryside began growing rapidly, adding new members and drilling. They already outnumbered the army, and soon the disparity was as great as 2 to 1. The most powerful of these militias and the most experienced from the French and Indian War was the Concord Militia. The Concord Militia had a large arsenal of weapons that was guarding. Next door to Concord was Lexington, which had a small militia but 2 very important colonial colonial figures who were fugitives. Sam Adams and John Hancock had been sentenced to death by a British court for their roles in the Tea Party. They were hiding in Lexington. The British Army was going to send 2,000 soldiers across the Charles River from Boston Common on the night of April the 18th, 1775. They were going to land in Cambridge, not far from Harvard, march northwest through Lexington without stopping. They had arrest warrants for Sam Adams and John Hancock. Didn't know exactly where they were. Their objective was to seize that arsenal in Concord. That was the plan. It was a disaster. The Sons of Liberty had a superb spy service run by Paul Revere's closest friend, the man John Adams said would have been our first president had he not been killed on Breed's Hill over here. The street dead ahead is named for him, Dr. Joseph Warren. It was Joseph Warren's plan, what we call the Midnight Ride. His objectives were simple. 2 riders, only 2, would start the process. They would leave Boston from opposite sides of the peninsula, about 45 minutes apart, make their way up to Lexington first, boarding as many militiamen as they could, rendezvous in Lexington, change horses, warn Sam Adams and John Hancock that they would have to flee, and then continue on to Concord to alert the large, powerful Concord militia. That was the plan. Paul Revere was the second courier, not the first. The first was an amateur actor and swiney William Dawes. Paul Revere left from the North End. 2 of his friends rowed him across a little boat right behind the British warship, the Somerset. Never saw him. Revere was an experienced courier. He had performed dozens of missions for the Sons of Liberty. He always got paid for it too. He got paid by the mile. Well, he was on his second marriage and had 14 children. He needed to support them. He would ultimately have 16. And he had a dream several days before the midnight ride in which he saw his own death. He thought he was going to die the night of the midnight ride. Did Paul Revere. Didn't tell his wife, didn't tell his best friend Joseph Warren. He simply gathered his lawyers and made sure his estate was in order. Of course, he survived. What happened next? That's the next story I'm going to tell you. As we pulled into USS Constitution, stopped for the Civil War, they were absolutely right. England was a dangerous, unstable place. Coming here had plenty of dangers. But given the state of England in the 1620s and 30s, it was safer than staying at what had been their home for generations. So they elected to come here. There were bitter divisions inside England, class divisions, religious divisions, not just Protestant versus Catholic, but Protestant versus Protestant. And just 12 years after Boston was founded by John Winthrop, Civil War. 2 civil wars came to England, which killed 1/4 of England's people, 1 in 4. Imagine if the American Civil War had killed 1/4 of the population. It was beyond devastating. When Oliver Cromwell's Puritan armies invaded southern Ireland during the English Civil War, hungry for Irish land, they killed 1/3 of the population, 1 in 3. This is remembered in Ireland to this day. These were the times the Puritans and Pilgrims lived in. That's why they came here. By 1700, this was the busiest port city in British North America. It's important to remember that despite the fact that Pilgrim and Puritan alike, they were deeply religious, this was about making money. This was a commercial colony. Natural resources were abundant. Remember, Massachusetts included the modern-day state of Maine in those days. Natural resources were abundant, and in no time at all, this became a very wealthy colony with a superb natural harbor here in Boston. Trouble began because of colonial rivalry between England and France. Trouble was brewing throughout the 18th century, but in 1756 it exploded into war. The French and Indian War, or 7 Years' War, it lasted 7 years, ending in 1763. That's where the roots of the Revolutionary War can be traced. The French and Indian War destroyed the local economy. Threw thousands of young men in Boston out of work, and they had nothing to do with their time. were extremely bitter here about the war being fought at all. They felt that they were dragged into a war that was not of their choosing. British acted was controlled by the East India Company, and that the war was fought on the East India Company's behalf. This was widely believed, and not without reason. You remember all those taxes you had to memorize in grade school that were passed after the war? Tea Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Act, etc., etc., etc. Well, what was most important on that list of taxes was what wasn't taxed. The wealthiest and most powerful institution in the English-speaking world at that time was not taxed, the East India Company. And this caused enormous anger here. The Stamp Act absolutely crippled merchants of modest means. That was how you made your living. Buying and selling stuff that came in by sea. If there was any interruption to sea traffic, you were basically out of work. If unnecessary expenses like a whacking great tax on the commercial paper you had to use to conduct a business transaction, small and mid-sized merchants couldn't afford it. What was this tax on commercial paper? It involved purchasing an expensive stamp from His Majesty's stationery store for every single piece of commercial paper used in a business transaction. Even a small one required 5 to 10 pieces of paper. That meant 5 to 10 stamps. No one could afford it except the wealthy. And the young men of Boston, idle, often drunk, prone to violence and rioting, were prime targets for recruitment into a new organization, the Sons of Liberty, founded by John Adams' second cousin Sam and his business partner, the richest man in Boston, the richest man in the colony, John Hancock. Their efforts, beginning with the repeal of the Stamp Act in 1765, and I'll tell you how they did that in a second, would 10 years later end with 2 gleams of lantern light on that steeple to your left from Christ Church of Boston, symbolically beginning the American Revolutionary War on the night of April 18, 1775. How did things deteriorate that quickly? How did prosperous colonies come to believe that they were so badly mistreated they had no option but armed rebellion? Well, part of the answer to that lies in the crippling blunders the British government made during this time, the mid-late 1760s. They would never have mustered public support for violent action, violent civil disobedience, in this case against the Stamp Act, if it hadn't been so arrogant and so egregious. No dialogue. The government would not negotiate with the colonists in any way, shape, or form. Our way or the highway. His Majesty says you have to pay the tax, you pay the tax. But it's impossible. It doesn't matter. You have to pay it. And this inflexibility manifested itself again and again and again because of the pressure of time. I'm focusing only on the Stamp Act, but there are many other examples. And it just resulted in a general belief that the British Empire, the British government, was not in any way responsible or sensitive to its obligations. The British government had obligations to its subjects, the king especially. And these obligations were being ignored. So Sam Adams and John Hancock, thanks to Paul Revere, their chief recruiter, fielded a de facto private army of unemployed and underemployed young men. And they conducted a campaign of intimidation against British tax collectors, tarring and feathering them. This is usually not mentioned in the history books. That's what got the Stamp Act repealed in 1765. And from that point on, things took a completely different direction. And in 10 years' time, you had armed rebellion. We'll get into the details after we drop off and pick up. Buildings vanished 200 years ago. Guys, best seats are upstairs. We're just about to leave. Grab a seat. Stop 3 is USS Constitution, finally reopened. I always urge my guests to visit the oldest commissioned warship in the world, one of our most popular attractions. She fought 42 battles during the War of 1812, never lost. Every evening at dusk, she will fire her cannon by tradition, 365 days a year. This elicits bitter complaints from the condominium owners next door, people for whom I have no sympathy. Stop 4 is the TD Bank North Garden North Station with the ruins of the Celtics play. Stop 5 is the old State House. It's over in that direction to our left. The oldest building you'll be able to see from the trolley. It dates from 1713. Renovated countless times. It gives an excellent tour. I don't know what their Saturday tour schedule is, but they give an excellent tour on Monday through Friday. You can see about 18%, maybe a fifth of the building is original, but it's all on the inside. You can see it on the tour. Stop 6 is Cheers, and that's an important stop because you can pick up what people refer to as the orange line, the Back Bay Loop, demarcated by an orange line on your map. That will take you to the Prudential Center, the Hilton, the Sheraton, the Colony, Marriott, the Colonnade Hotel. Those are all in the Back Bay. Then to Trinity Church, and then back to stop number 7, which is our Welcome Center.
Stop number 1 every 20 minutes. So that trolley leaving right now is the 10 o'clock, and then the next one that will roll up will be leaving now in about at exactly about 10:20. We're going to go. Pretty much burned down to the ground in a mere 36 hours. The 10th and 11th of November, and upon the ashes of the Great Fire, disregard the signs there. So upon the ashes of the Great Fire rises our financial district. It includes the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston on your right. On the left side, you'll see the Tea Party. We got 2 ships. Apparently, it is ignore the right turn only sign on the street. That's the 3rd car in succession. That is where, on one of the ships, that's the Brig Viva. Everyone is probably inside mustering for the first show. That's why. Oh, there's some of the actors and actresses. Hello. He's never missed in 10 years. I was waiting for the mighty hustle. So you have the Eleanor, one ship, and the Brig Viva. We're going to stop over to the right to get there. Across the street, there is a button on the pole right behind that female, and if you hit the button, it will make that light go red. So this will be number 9. City tours will come through every 20 minutes. They also the blue, and if you're interested, down the block to the left, there's actually the Boston Fire Museum, where you see the fire apparatus. This is stop number 9 on the city tour. Dressed up as Mohawk Indians. The point of the story is nobody was individually punished. Because when the British did their investigation, they were asking the Bostonians who threw the tea in the harbor, and everybody claimed they didn't know because they were Indians. How would we know the name of any Indian? So that being said, we go in the general direction. They would have went a little bit different. But our next stop is where we have our actors and actresses and our team reenact the Tea Party every single day. So the number 9 stop will be the Tea Party Ships in the Museum. You pass by Post Office Square. Benjamin Franklin was the first Postmaster General. He was born on Milk Street, but they don't want to change the name because they'll lose American history. And so Benjamin Franklin Street right next to the Post Office Square. So number 9 will be our next stop.
Now stay in your lily pad till we come to a complete stop. Now watch your step getting off. We wouldn't want you to... Oh.
That's your Benjamin Franklin on your left, out front of Old City Hall. He is joined by Josiah Quincy, so on your left side, Josiah Quincy, the one-time mate. And about 2,500 people inside and out of the Old South Church. The building on your right is the building that played a major role in the Boston Tea Party. That's where Sam Adams led the charge. Sons of Liberty, there were woods in this area. So all day long, everyone was kind of waiting. They were waiting. Sam Adams did. There was a boy named Daniel Roch. His dad was on board one of the ships, but Daniel was sent on horseback out to Waltham. And he was to ask Governor Hutchinson a single question. Will you remove the tea from the harbor? And so all day long, Sam Adams was waiting for the return of little Daniel Roch to let him know the answer. And of course, Governor Hutchinson wasn't going to do anything with the tea. And when Sam Adams got the word, memorials, the one that we were parallel to back there was the Shaw Memorial. And Louisa May Alcott wrote several books about the Little Women. She actually finished Little Women specifically when she lived at the Bellevue Hotel. And she would visit Thoreau and Emerson, and the very famous English writer Charles Dickens chose to live in Boston before and after the Civil War. And he chose to live at the hotel that's up there on the right, the famous Parker House. The burial ground on the left is named after the church. That's the King's Chapel burial ground. There's a bulldog over there. We're going to hang back here. We share this space with City View, so we're going to let them do their thing before we roll it. But over on your left, that's John F. Kennedy in the foreground. Anne Hutchinson behind him. So what happened with Anne is the Puritans didn't like the female. They were kind of not more, but there were a lot of people going to her house on Sundays to talk about her thoughts about the Bible. So the Puritan ministers didn't really like her, and they had a trial. And she was driven out of the city. They started a school, and eventually John Harvard donated his books to the school, and that became Harvard, and that's where that fella graduated from. Now you wonder, if you know about Anne Hutchinson, why is there just one of her children? She had 14 kids altogether. Well, Anne was driven out of the city with, I believe, 9 of her children. She eventually moved. She followed Roger Williams down to Providence, Rhode Island. But somehow the city of Boston was still annoying her to such an extent that she moved from Providence, Rhode Island, down to an area that's now known as the Bronx, New York. And she had no idea that the house that she purchased in that community had been stolen and built upon Indian grounds. So for years, this Indian tribe in the woods were kind of spying on her. And one day, little Susanna, that's her daughter there, went out to pick berries. And about a mile off, she looks back to where the house is, and she spoke. And unfortunately, the Indians and her other children alive. Susanna came out of the woods. She had strawberry blonde hair that the Indians had never seen anything like that. And so they didn't kill her, and eventually somehow Boston find out about it. They actually bought Susanna from the Indian tribe, and she eventually raised the family. I was waiting for City View to roll, but apparently they're not doing that right now. We're giving people time to sketch the Capitol building. Just gonna make sure that no one's up there running toward us. That is the stuff that we share, but apparently they want it. And it got the white flags down there. That's part of the Lung Cancer Awareness Week. And to the right side there, then eventually there's a Christmas tree on its way from Halifax, Nova Scotia. A 45-foot white spruce tree is going to be delivered to the city on Tuesday. If you're unfamiliar with why that happens, way back in 1917, if you look it up in Wikipedia, it's called the Great Halifax Explosion. This ship called the Mont Blanc was loaded with more explosives than any ship should ever have had on it, and because it was during the World War, they took the flag down off of it that would have told everybody dynamite on board because they were fearful that a German submarine might see the flag and intentionally run into it. So this ship collided with another ship in the Narrows that were in between Halifax and Richmond up in Nova Scotia. And the detonation remains the second largest detonation other than the atomic bombs. About 2,000 people were vaporized, 10,000 people injured, and Boston's medical community were the first medical community to get up to Halifax. And since 1940, they have chopped down a Christmas tree and delivered it to the city. So if you go online, you can follow it, Boston Halifax tree. There's a stream that got the truck coming down. Michelle Wu, our mayor, went up there for the celebration. So it's a 45-foot tree. On Tuesday, it will be revealed in the Boston Common. The red brick line, by the way, that is the Freedom Trail right there. And those people walking away from us will go around the corner and they get into the famous Granary Burial Ground.
Who's the guy on the horse right here?
That is